A happy New Year's Eve, everyone, on the eve of the start of the CFP quarterfinals. I'm Chris Hassel on CBS Sports HQ Spotlight. News today that the college football playoff could be tweaked a little bit moving forward to seed based on ranking and not conference titles. The Lions and Vikings in the NFL probably wish something similar had been done in the NFL going into their matchup in Detroit next week. It's going to determine the number one seed in the NFC and a bye. The loser of that game could be 14-3 and have to go on the road as a 5 seed on Wild Card weekend. Only 2 other playoff spots are up for grabs. Last wild card in the AFC and the NFC South Championship. Let's take a closer look at the playoff picture in the NFL with Pete Prisco and Leger Douzable. Pete, I want to start with you on this. Does a 14-3 team potentially having to go on the road first round make you rethink how we should be doing seeding in the NFL?
No, not one bit. Look, it always evens up in the end. And one year there's one team from one division that's getting this situation put on them by having to travel with a better record. It always evens up in the end. So the answer to your question is no. And I know people are going to be, oh my gosh, how dare they? They have to go on the road. Win your division, then you don't have to worry about it. It's quite simple. So no, I am not one of those guys that thinks it needs to be changed.
I'm going to be on the opposite side, Pete, because when you look at the NFC South and the AFC South, they've been routinely bad for the last decade, maybe even plus. And I know to your point, things kind of even out, but it really hasn't evened out when you talk about an NFC South team and an AFC South team getting a home playoff game. So I actually brought this scenario up, Has and Pete, on pushing the pile. That was one of my talking points. I think the CFP, they're going to revisit that too, because it shouldn't be based off of conference championships. It should be based off the rankings. And when you look at the NFC side and the AFC side, I think the NFL may look at this in the future and say, let's get some of our top teams at home. You shouldn't get punished because you're in a really good division, i.e. the NFC North. When you look at it, the Green Bay Packers, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Detroit Lions, like if seeding was done by record, maybe all 3 of those teams get a home game. Right now, again, to Pete's point, it does fluctuate from year to year. But I will say this, the AFC South and the NFC South have been scapegoating the last couple of years because they have had weaker divisions. A lot of times, the team that wins that division usually is right around 500 or 10-7. So if this trend continues, I think the NFL should look at this.
Go ahead, Pete.
Well, why the hell would you have divisions then? What's the point of it? What's the point of having divisions?
Let's not do divisions then.
If you're not going to... Well, I mean, that's a whole other story. Get rid of the divisions then. Then you don't have division rivalries. Then you take away Baltimore and Pittsburgh playing and having those great division rivalries. I mean, come on, Leger. You can't change the thing. It's ridiculous. Everybody makes this claim every year when some team with a worse record is hosting a playoff game. It's just part of the way the divisions are set up. And if we don't have divisional rivalries, I think that ruins the NFL. It'll make it more like college football. Don't do it.
Lions play tonight against the 49ers in a meaningless game, even if they lose that. It's all going to come down to next week in this matchup. And Leger, when the Vikings go to Detroit, how is the winner of that game going to determine how you see the NFC playoffs taking shape?
Yeah, me and Pete talked about this last week. We feel like the Detroit Lions need the number 1 seed, right? They need that extra week of rest because of all the injuries they've occurred on the defensive side of the ball. There's a good chance they can get Alex Anzalone, their linebacker, back. Carlton Davis, their cornerback. So if they don't get that bye week, then they'd have to most likely go into next week without having those 2 pieces on their roster. And then when you look at it, the Minnesota Vikings, they're playing hot right now, right? If they get the number 1 seed and you have to go through Minnesota, everybody knows that skull clap gets really loud. So if the Vikings were to win this game, and I'm going to go back to something that you said, Has, you're saying tonight's game has no bearing. That's not entirely true because if the Lions win, right, all they need is a tie next week. And we've seen a couple scenarios in week 17 where a tie almost got a team to the playoffs. I mean, the Broncos were in that scenario. They just couldn't get a first down to get a tie. And there's been a couple other games where a tie would have got a team into the playoffs. So there is a little bit at stake for the Lions. But to your point, yes, whoever wins next week most likely will win the division. But to me, the Detroit Lions, they need to get that home field advantage. That way they can get healthier in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's much more important to the Lions because of all the injuries. But, looking at the way the playoffs will be seeded, if it is the Detroit-Minnesota winner #1, do you think that people can't go in there and beat those two teams? Because I certainly don't. And I think it's wide open. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see a team like Tampa Bay or even Green Bay. I mean, Green Bay got off to a slow start on Sunday against the Vikings and came back within 2 late in the game and needed to stop to get a chance to win the game. So I think the NFC is wide open, and any of those teams can go in there and beat Detroit or Minnesota.
And what we do know, the Eagles are locked into that 2 spot as well. Speaking of 2, only 2 real playoff spots up for grabs. The last wild card in the AFC and the NFC South Championship. Leger spoke on that briefly about how, the NFC South, AFC South tend to be the weaker divisions in the NFL, at least in recent past. The Bucs, all they need now is just to beat the lowly Saints at home. And Pete, your preseason prediction will be true that the Bucs, who were not the favorite in this division, will win.
By the way, real quick on Leger talking about divisions, I think he needs to look at his AFC East, where those mighty Jets and Dolphins and Patriots reside.
This is the first year it's been down, Pete.
Well, but that's the point, though. That's the point. It's all cyclical. It goes around. It all comes around. And if you cover this league as long as I have, you've seen it all come right around again, and it will that way as well. So look, back to the Bucs. Look. This team, when I saw them in the summer, and I saw them twice, I saw them in minicamp and in training camp, and I came away with the idea that they would have a great mix of veteran players and young players. And you're starting to see that kind of mold together as they get guys back healthy, particularly on defense. Cansey's starting to make plays. You get Whitehead back, a veteran on this back end. That's important. You're going to get Winfield back. I love where this team is. And by the way, Baker Mayfield is having an MVP-type season. He's not going to get votes, but he should be in consideration for Offensive Player of the Year. That's how well he's playing. I love what they're doing. Keep an eye on this team. They will be dangerous come playoff time.
Yeah, going back to the conversation we had earlier in regards to Minnesota and Detroit, and you're saying, either one of those teams can lose at home. We already saw the Tampa Bay Bucks beat Detroit in Detroit. So, if you're the Detroit Lions, that's the one matchup you probably don't want to see in the first round if you lose to the Minnesota Vikings going on the road to Tampa Bay. But I do have some concerns, Pete, and we've talked about this before. The secondary of the Tampa Bay Bucks, right? The injury bug has hit them at the wrong time. Now, we'll see if Winfield can come back for the playoffs, but they missed him mightily the last couple of weeks. They've given up too many explosive plays in that secondary, and that gives me some concern. Now, with Baker Mayfield, to your point, they can score with almost anybody the way he's playing right now, whether it's the quick game, whether it's him going through his progressions and throwing the ball down the field to Mike Evans. Jalen McMillan has really come on strong. I know me and Pete did a breakdown of him last Sunday. He's essentially been penciled in as that #2 guy and has really stepped up his game since Chris Godwin got hurt. So this is a very dangerous team in the Tampa Bay Bucks, but I do have some concerns on the defensive end. Can they make enough stops to win a game in the playoffs?
2-touchdown favorite against the Saints. Win that, and they're in. If they were to lose that opens the door for the Falcons, who play the Carolina Panthers in that early window on Sunday. In the late window, we're going to decide the final wild card spot in the AFC, and the Chiefs are going to have a major hand in this, in how they go about their game with the Denver Broncos, who are playing a win-and-in game against KC, a KC team that's already locked up the 1 seed. So Andy Reid today was asked about how they're going to approach that game.
But you get to this level, it's single elimination. There's so much parity going on, and you've got to play your best football. I mean, that's really the deal. And it doesn't matter which one of the teams. I mean, they're all good, and you've got to make sure you play well. So that'll be our main focus on playing well and making sure we're sharp, and then we'll dig in here on these different scenarios that go on. For right now, Denver's got our attention, and so that's kind of where we're at right this minute.
All right, didn't shed too much on it, but Pete, what should the Chiefs do? Because they have an opportunity here. If they win this game, the Bengals are out, and they're one of the hottest teams in the league right now.
Yeah, and look, Andy Reid, remember, this is a team that plays players and veteran players in the preseason. He has physical training camps, but, you also get 3 weeks off. And this is a football team over the course of the last 3 seasons has played a lot of football if you count the playoffs and Super Bowls. So you step back and you say, maybe it's in our best advantage to rest some guys. And that's what I would do for this team. It's not the same formula for every team. But if I'm Andy Reid, I'm resting my stars, not playing them. And by the way, don't think that the Broncos are just going to go out there and just, roll over the team that does show up and play, because you only have so many guys on your leaster, and you got to play guys. So they're going to play a lot of players, even if the stars don't play. It's not going to be as easy as you think, particularly for a young football team.
Leger, I saw you kind of scoffing there after you heard Andy Reid. I don't know if it was based on something you thought Pete was going to say or what Andy Reid said. What are your thoughts there?
Andy Reid. Yeah, Pete, he was being coy. Andy Reid was being coy. There's no way Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, who's dealing with an ailment right now, Travis Kelce, are playing in this game. And, Pete, we know this. The Achilles heel for the Kansas City Chiefs have been Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, again, you don't want a divisional foe to get in the Denver Broncos, and they took them to the wire earlier this year. But this is not the same Chiefs team. Me and Pete have talked about this ad nauseum, how this Chiefs team is getting healthy on offense, and we're starting to see the Patrick Mahomes of old. So if you're Andy Reid, I think he's just being coy, There's no way he's going to play Patrick Mahomes, Kelce, Chris Jones is not going to play. And honestly, he might not even play Isaiah Pacheco because he's had to deal with ailments as well. And now, to Pete's point, you can't rest everybody right now. You'll still dress the majority of your starters, but you'll probably put some backups in and just have guys dressed just in case somebody gets nicked or banged up. But there's no way Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, or Travis Kelce are playing in this game. And the Kansas City Chiefs do not want to see the Bengals in the playoffs. Trust me.
The Bengals are the only team to beat the Chiefs in the playoffs over the last 3 years. But, Pete, they would also need the Dolphins to lose to the Jets if Cincy is going to get in. Tua's status still very much unknown. What do you think about that?
Well, remember, he had a hip injury in college that was a concern as well. So if it's something that lingers and something that's going to be an issue and keep him out of this game, then, look, as bad as the Jets are, and they were terrible on Sunday, and they looked like they folded up the shop and went to Cancun for vacation already. They were awful. But it is Jets-Dolphins. It is probably going to be cold, and they got a little break, Miami and Cleveland. It wasn't that cold. So, look, anything can happen. If Tua's not in the game, Miami could have a fight on their hands if the Jets decide to show up, and we know how that's been the last month of the season. That's an enormous if.
And then you got the Bengals who, if things fall their way, they get into the postseason as one of the hottest teams in the league. Leger, if they don't get in, though, is there anything to build off of here in how they've finished the season and how Joe Burrow has played specifically?
Not at all, because each season is its own season. I think it's always funny, Pete, when you hear people like, we need to finish the season strong. That way we can use that momentum going into the off. No, it's going to be a totally new team the next year. They have so many question marks in regards to some of their front-end players. When you talk about T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson and also Jamar Chase, who knows who's going to be on this team next year? So, no, even if they do finish out, I think, win 5 straight, it has no bearing of what's going to happen on next year's team because it's going to be a different team. Again, one of the hottest teams in football. The Kansas City Chiefs don't want to most likely see them in the playoffs, but if they weren't able to make the playoffs, it has no bearing on next season at all.
By the way, not just the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, the Steelers, the Chargers, nobody in the AFC wants to see the Bengals in the playoffs. They are dangerous because Joe Burrow is playing unreal football and they could score a ton of points. Nobody wants them in.
Bengals trying to sneak their way in to finish off this season, but need a lot of help to get there. Pete Prisco and Leger Douzable with us here on HQ Spotlight as we look at the updated odds to win the Super Bowl. The Chiefs plus 380. They're the favorites. And then it's the Detroit Lions who have a game tonight against the San Francisco 49ers. And then next week, a game where the winner will decide the 1 seed and the 5 seed in the NFC between the Lions and the Vikings, who are down there at plus 850.